watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. For almost 130 years, FBCMF has served Marble Falls and the greater Highland Lakes area faithfully through children's programs, youth activities, and adult discipleship. We invite you to join us each and every Sunday morning at 9 and 10:30 a.m. for deep fellowship, rich worship, and a spirit-filled message. For those who find themselves unable to attend on a Sunday morning, we stream those services. Simply visit fbcmf.live during either of our service times to view it. Never miss an archived sermon by subscribing to this podcast on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/FBCMFtube. And to learn more about our church or to listen to an audio-only version of this and other sermons, please visit us online at fbcmf.org. Let's get right to it. Your tithes and offerings are vital to the health of our church. They are not the reasons that we do what we do, nor do they take the place of the Spirit of God in our mission, but the simple fact is that ministry costs money. Your tithes and offerings allow us to continue to love our neighbors right here in our city and all over the world. With them, we are able to feed the poor, clothe the naked, help the sick, and visit those in prison. Your generosity helps to fulfill the call that God has placed in the hearts of those in leadership by moving things from ideas on paper to acts of service that can change the world. Like any other organism, there are several moving parts to ensure that things continue to run smoothly, and most of them are automated. We breathe without thinking. Our hearts pump blood through our body on its own. The rain comes and life flourishes. And when everything is in working order, these things happen without you or I needing to intervene. Now, the same can be true about how we do our part with our tithes and offerings here at church. You can set up recurring giving to come out at a time that works best for you in the exact amount that you have decided. Doing so will allow the vitality of our church to endure without giving way to busy schedules, projects at work, or family vacations. And you can cancel or change both the schedule and the amount at any time. So please, consider setting yourself or your family up on a recurring giving plan and help our church move forward with what God is calling us to do. For more information and help getting set up, please go to fbcmf.org/give.
If you wonder about who is this guy standing up here, my name is Previn Vong, Dr. V, as some people say, to just avoid all the other nonsense, I guess. But whatever you call me, as long as it's nice, I'll respond. How's that? All right. I'm here to preach during this time when your wonderful pastor, Ross, and his family are on a sabbatical, which I want to commend you for giving them. I want to encourage you also during that time, in spite of the preacher, to invite your friends, your family during the summertime. Nothing is more encouraging, I'm just saying, to a pastor when he's gone than to know that the church is fully engaged and excited about what the Lord is doing in their midst. We are dealing here during these 8 weeks when I'm here in a sermon series that we kind of making here, Meeting Jesus in the Hill Country. And so we have looked at various texts, and you heard also from the reading this morning that we now meet Jesus here on the Mount of Olives where the Garden of Gethsemane is. But let me begin by telling you a story. It's a legend, so that's what it is, so take it for that. But as the legend goes, God, when he first created the birds, he created them without wings. And so he looked at them and said, I want to create wings also, and he created the wings, and he placed them in front of the birds. And then he told the birds, I want you to pick them up and carry them. And at first they hesitated a little bit. Then they thought, we better obey God, and so they picked it up with their beaks and carried it around. But these things were heavy when you carried them, and so they swung them around and put them on the back to kind of lighten the load, so to speak. And then it happened. They began to grow, and they began not only to grow, but they began to grow into the birds, so to speak, and they became a part of the birds and what it meant to be a bird, that they had wings. And soon enough, they learned that this new attachment was not just a burden, but they became an instrument where they suddenly now found themselves soaring high, gliding through the air, going places that before the wings had been impossible for them to access or even reach. You know, sometimes as human beings, we carry burdens. And these burdens so many times feel like they are designed only to weigh our lives down, to make it miserable. They are just burdens. Well, the Bible calls moments like that, if you will, or times like that, with a word that somewhat explains that there's a purpose sometimes with some of these things, right? And it calls them trials or tests, to use another English translation for that word, right? Difficulties and struggles and hardships and just burdens that come our way, but things that if they're not looked at or perceived in the right kind of way, they become nothing but burdens. They're just there to weigh us down. But if we look at what comes like that in the right perspective, these can become the very vehicles, the means, the instruments, if you will, that allows us to see God's hand and allow him to shape us and to form us and to strengthen us. And we might even get to the point where we see that becomes the very wings that can make us fly. So, as this third message, I guess, in this series where we say meeting Jesus in the hill country, we are now here and we recognize that we need these hilltop experiences because life is formed and shaped by that. And today it may be somewhat different than last time when we looked at the hilltop experience of God's provision and opportunity. Here we meet Jesus and ourselves in a very different kind of situation. And yet, we need to get up there, friends, to have that kind of wind under our wings that makes us see everything in a different way. So I'm asking you to follow me up that mountain. Like I said last Sunday as well, I want to say this Sunday also, try to get into the story. Don't just listen to that. This is something that is external. Be there with the disciples. Go up that mountain, if you will, with Jesus. The text as we just read it, if you have your Bibles or some other way of looking at it, begins in verse 36 of chapter 26 of the Gospel of Matthew, and it's a riveting text in so many ways. It's teaching us about how we as human beings also can experience that which maybe at the moment feels as nothing but darkness and difficulty and pain and burden can also be changed. And there's a different way of understanding life even and through that. It somewhat depends on the weight, if you will, you give to the Lord's presence and power in your life. So look here, and let's see what's going on. That's kind of the situation, if we can paint that clear once again, right? Jesus is now facing a very difficult situation. He is going and bringing his whole group of disciples up that hillside. We're not on the hilltop. If some of those of you who know about the Garden of Gethsemane, you'll know that it's kind of right there on the beginning of the hillside of the Mount of Olives. And so when he shows up, he's bringing all his friends, if you will, the whole group of the disciples. And it's not as if they don't understand something is going on that is somewhat intensive. Of course, he comes out there at late at night at this time. And so he brings the first group of disciples and he leaves them there, and he brings his closest three with him a little bit further. And as he gets even further into that, is amplifying the intensity once again of the difficulty. He said, would you just stay here and pray with me as I go further a little bit to meet with God alone? You know, this says a lot to us about how to tackle some of these things. If you think about it, surely we need the friends, and we need our friends there to go with us, but there's just certain things. You get to this point, and it's you and God alone, yes? There's just certain things that you ask for prayer for. You want your friends to be there. You need them to support you, but you need to be there all alone with the Lord. There's just something you can't work through in any other way. And so this, in many ways, kind of is bringing Jesus back to the very experience he had for 40 days in the desert, he and God alone. Before he begins his whole ministry, he had to learn to rely fully on God to withstand whatever darkness came his way. And I want to say to you, friends, so that we hear this, because there might be some sitting here this morning. There may be some of you all that are listening also on live stream somewhere, that these moments, dark as they can be, heavy as they can be, are often the most life-transforming moments that you will ever have. It's just kind of how it works. These moments, if you will, these intense situations where the human struggle with the difficulties are facing and meeting God, you will see that these moments will not only reveal who you are, they'll also shape who you will become. It's how that works. And so I wanted to see that this is so. If you keep your eyes there in the text again, all the way through history, I'm about to say, I don't care where you look almost, but even if you look at just a couple of the biblical examples, it'll be clear, right? You have Abraham, who knew it all, had it all, and everything was good, and God called him out of what he knew to go to this new place, and it was only when he and God alone got to this point that he now became the father of faith, right? Moses, another person that God needed to use in a specific way, he was called away from the pomp and circumstance of the castle of the Egyptian emperor, right, out into the desert. He and God alone, and he worked it through, and they got to this point where Moses suddenly became that one that God could use. And then you got the people of Israel, right? The whole people of God who walked in the desert for 40 years until they had learned to trust God and God alone. And then you get to Jesus himself, God's own son. 40 days in the desert, he and God alone. And then you keep going and you get to Paul and the very apostle that God used to spread the gospel throughout the whole globe. In fact, if it hadn't been for Paul, at least from a human perspective, we would not have had this morning service. I'm just telling you, right? Right? And so, after he had met God on that road to Damascus, the next thing we hear pretty much, he's in Arabia for 3 years. He and God alone. We could give more examples, one after the other, about how these dark and difficult moments, whether they actually happen physically, as they did here in these examples in the desert, or is more in a symbolic way, like we may experience it as just this very difficult, isolated place. And I'm sure that some of you may be there right now, even if you're not letting someone know. At least there's a lot like that. So are you ready, friends, for us to walk together up that hillside, away from the valley that is just filled with pain, up where we can see a little bit clearer what God is doing and see it's about his trials and his testing. You know, I read about the selection of timber, logs, if you will, lumber, when they cut them down higher up in the mountains. And they had these gigantic logs, and they get them to a river, and they kind of come floating down like great interstates, right? And they're solid almost with these logs. And lumberjacks, as they're called, or river hogs, as they're also called, people, they're running around on these logs as they come floating down this river, down the mountain, and they are pulling some, having this long kind of, what looks like an iron hook, where they push and they pull and they try to select and do some of that. And in the article, I read about that. I'm sure some of you may even have seen that, on TV or, National Geographic or something like that. In the place where I read about that, they were asking one of these lumberjacks or river hogs, why are you doing and what are you doing exactly? And he said, well, some of that is that we're trying to guide it from it not to kind of, get stuck, and we can keep the flow going. But there's also a selection process. And what happens, he said, was that there's some of these trees that were placed on the mountain in a way where they've been protected from the hard winds and from just the elements. They're grown up somewhat isolated in terms of, protected, I should say, in terms of that. Because of that protection, the structure of the wood is looser, it's coarser, it's not as hard. So we let that pass through first, whereas that which has grown on the places on the mountain where there's been harsh wind and just hard weather from the very moment they came through the ground the first time, they are much tougher, and the grain and the structure of the wood is much tighter and finer, and that's much too good a wood to just let use for regular lumber. So we select that out. That can be used for fine woodwork and that kind of stuff, furniture of the finest kind. I hope you're hearing what the Spirit is saying here with some of this, right? It is the tough moments, tough experiences in your life that God sometimes will take and use. And they can become tests, they can become trials, they can become the moments where you are shaped and you're strengthened for the very task that God needs for you to be involved in. The storms, if you will refine your grain. Can I use that illustration still? So that you'll be strengthened in the very fabric of your personality will be strong. You will be able to see God's hand and be used in ways that would not have been possible without this. Now look back in the text again, and I want to kind of connect here and say that there's something to notice here, and it strikes me, Jesus did not celebrate isolation. It is not as if he said, I got to be all alone and handle this myself. It was not about isolation for the sake of isolation. He goes back to his friends for support again and again, even after he had noticed that the very people that he thought he could count on just went to sleep on him. And he still comes back and says, can you not pray with me? Pray with me. I need your support or to participate in what I'm going through. And so I want to highlight again all those friends that the struggle on that hillside of trials and difficulties has to happen alone. May I encourage you to always be reminded that you need your friends, your brothers and sisters, to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as you struggle there alone with God. We got a word for that. You know that. It's called church. Huh? It's called church. Now, I may kind of do a parenthesis here. So powerful, I need to mention it. It's in the text, so although I may interrupt the flow of some of the storyline of what goes on here. I want to say that the difference between the struggle that Jesus is in and the difficulties that we meet is clear. Now, we need our friends and our brothers and sisters to be around because we need all the support we can because we have not truly learned to fully and utterly and only rely on God. Now, Jesus is asking and requesting the support from his disciples because he knew that it was only a matter of a very short time before he will discover and he will experience what no one else had ever experienced and never will experience again. And that is to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? No one will ever have to cry out again. Jesus knew that before long, all the powers of evil will gather around him and on him. All the full force of the darkness of demonic world will come upon him. All the punishment that belonged to all the evil that all human beings had ever done and ever will do will settle on him. And it was dark in the darkest of ways, and it was painful in the most painful of ways, and he cries out. But friends, can I say, it is because Jesus' willingness to carry the pain and the darkness for us in this way, because of that now the resources of heaven have been released for us. That's it. It has made it possible for us to not just experience things as a valley of darkness, of pain, but to move up on that hillside and see these are trials and tests that God can and will use. Are you coming up with us? I'm just asking. So notice what happens here. Notice Jesus' prayer. Quite powerful. There's no imagination. There's not even a contemplation, a consideration that this should be easy. The whole focus is not on God just taking everything away. The focus is on God's will to happen. One of the most important verses right here that kind of stands out so that we can recognize that this reveals more than anything the foundation on which anyone stands. Jesus says here, "Yet not what I will, but as you will, O Lord." That's it. That changes everything, friends. Everything is placed and put in perspective with that one terse statement from verse 39. Don't miss this. Please, don't miss this. Not my will, but yours. This is where the test will come, friends, also in your life. How are you going to face these trials, these tests, these difficult moments, if you will? Are you ready to let it just overtake you, swallow you whole, so to speak? Or you just one of them that clenches their teeth and said, "This is what's going to happen, and this is just fate, and I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to get through it." Like there's nothing to do about it, or will you, in the clear conviction and awareness of God's love and promise of faithfulness, His presence, are you going to cry out to God and say, "God, what are you trying to tell me here? What is happening in my life? Would you please show your faith? I need to know what I can learn from this, from you. Use this, O Lord, to shape me, to strengthen me, to make me useful in ways that I never thought was even possible. Not my will, but your will." You know, one of the mightiest chapters that we have in all the New Testament, I believe, Romans chapter 8, in the 28th verse of that, it says, "All things work together for good for those who love the Lord." You hear that? All things. Not some things, not many things, but all things, yes? Dark moments too. Difficult struggles too. Depression too. Yes, all things. I have a confession to make. I'm not all that good at baking. I'm just not. I know people who are. But I know enough about baking to know when you make a cake, you put all kind of nice stuff in there. Good stuff. Chocolate, oh yeah. Sugar, oh yeah. Roasted nuts, you know it, right? Vanilla, good stuff. But then you also put, what is that word again? Yuck. Like, have you ever tasted baking soda? Or baking powder, for that matter? I mean, flour, yeast. Not really, right? But it takes both to mix it to make this wonderful, wonderful, beautiful, well-tasting cake. And see, this is how it is with the human life so often, always, right? What looks as nothing but pain and misery and yuck, when you look at it isolated, when you get up on that hillside, when you're there with Jesus and you learn and you see that this is a test from God in many ways, a trial you're going through, this is the place where God can mix in all that not so delicious stuff into your life, and out of the whole thing comes this life that is beautiful and glorious and tasteful, even useful. Are you seeing this? This is a powerful text, friends, when you look at it this way. There's just a way to look at these things, right? And the way you tackle these things that meet your life will determine whether you come to stand on that life-changing hillside of trial and testing, or whether you build a house in the valley of pain and darkness. If you choose to come up there, what you might see when you're there scouting for God's hand or God's finger, trying to eye what it is that He is doing, how He can use what you're going through even for His kingdom's sake. You'll find that He is testing you, letting you go through trials, through that shaping you, strengthening you, so that what may just have felt like heavy burdens on your shoulders, suddenly now will allow you to soar, glide through the air, bringing you places where you have never been before, allowing you to reach things that you have never been able to reach, all carried by the wind of God's Spirit.
You've been watching the video sermon podcast of First Baptist Church of Marble Falls, Texas. Never miss an archived sermon or video posted to our YouTube channel by subscribing to it at youtube.com/FBCMFtube. For more information about our church and to hear an audio-only version of this sermon, please visit us online at fbcmf.org.